Hey everyone, it's Andy Nam, and on this week's Fountain of Youth with Andy, I usually do this with my dear friend Margie, but she's driving home from Florida, visiting her grandchildren, so I got a special show today. Two of my other partners in crime or in health for the Chronic Health Collective. I have dear friend Amanda Beth Johnson. She is the founder of Amanda. She's going to tell you a little bit about herself, but she is a wellness coach and intuitive healer. And then, of course, we got our new coach that just joined us for Chronic Health Collective, and that is Jessica Hammock. I hope I said your last name right. And she is a trauma recovery coach. And today, I thought we would dive in a little bit talking about trauma and really how that can cause inflammation in your body, that can cause so many things going wrong inside your body, and literally sapping your energy and stealing your youth, making you old and crusty and everything, right? So, I figure I'll get you guys. You got a trauma specialist, we got an energy healer. I love to hear a little bit more of your perspectives on how trauma can cause so much problems in our life. And, it could be physical trauma, mental trauma, loss of a loved one. There's so many things that affect trauma in our life that we don't even think about. A lot of us, we just think we can just move on. And, just talking to Jessica, she gave me some really good hits. Moving on is not what you want to do. You want to be moving forward. So let's jump right on in. Let's start with you, Amanda. Why don't you give yourself a little bit introduction of what you do, and then what your thoughts of trauma and how it relates to energy healing and even to wellness.
Oh, wow. I hope you have a list for me to follow. So I am
Go ahead.
Amanda Beth. And let's see, I'm Amanda Beth. I am in Southeast Iowa. I am an intuitive healer, wellness coach. I do homeopathic educational consultation, and I also have a float center here in Southeast Iowa. My life, I think I've had my share of traumas, physical, emotional, the whole gamut that we do to get to where we are in life. And I think that for me as an intuitive healer, it's looking at how those traumas have been presented for you to find those learning lessons and to move forward in your life, to not allow your history to define who you are. And so that's what I work with. And I know with a lot of things, and I do the life wave patches with Andy as well. And so there's a whole lot of holistic things that I really like to bridge into my practices. And flotation has been a really big one in addressing my own, I would say, trauma responses with my physical health. But let's let everybody else kind of chime in here.
That is so awesome. And your isolation pods, Minna has done it locally. I have not done it personally yet, and she said it was weird that she couldn't really shut off her mind. But that's something that I really like to get into, because like
You,
for me, I have sort of like the monkey mind a little bit.
you've got to do it. You need to commit to doing it 3 times. The
Correct.
first time is figuring out what you got yourself into, what the space is about, what you can and can't do in there. I mean, as far as floating and what your body does, and where do your arms go and where do your legs
Correct.
go. And then the next time you are physically prepared to lay on top of the water. And then you can really start working with your mind and how to shut down your mind, and so that you can get there. And the third time your body goes, oh, cool, we're back. So I say try it 3 times. That's the industry standard. After you've tried it 3 times, then Minna can have a judgment about it.
I love it. I love it. So, Jessica, you are our newest coach to join us. And, of course, you've been on our Chronically Healthy Life show, before. But you're joining our Chronic Health Collective. What are your thoughts as a trauma recovery coach? First of all, what is that? Because people don't even know what that is. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And, what do you think, how trauma can actually help or hurt a lot of people, and maybe some of the quick things that some tips that you can give to to release some of the trauma.
Oh man, Andy, those are like big questions.
It's a
First,
big
I will
show.
say, first I will say back to Amanda's thing. That was a really good tip because I've been really trying a float spa is on my bucket list. So it's good to know now I've got to commit to 3 times.
Yep.
But what I will say about this is trauma is, most people clinically will say that trauma is a disorder. And what they found is trauma is an injury that occurs in our nervous system. And I think knowing that information up front is really powerful because injuries can heal. Disorders is a whole different approach. And so when we know that injuries can heal, there's, depending on who you talk to, the practitioner you talk to, there's many pathways to healing, right? But the reality is, when I work with somebody in that recovery and transformation stage, we look at the spirit healing, the soul healing, and the body healing. So the spirit can sustain a wound, that emotional, that heart part of you, I call it, but it's their spirit being the essence of who we are, can sustain a wound with trauma. Our soul, many people define as our mind, will, intellect, and emotions. It kind of hangs up here, a lot of it. And then our body can also sustain a trauma. And so it's looking at, first of all, do we know the entry point of the trauma itself? Was it a physical entry point, like from a car accident or from an injury that you sustain? Some people, depending on their age, they turn sideways and they pull, they have all of a sudden have a trauma. Interestingly enough, that only becomes a trauma. They talk about situations in your body that are pain points when you age. The reason that they stick in there is because you actually are holding the trauma in your tissues and it has not resolved out of your system in your physical body. And so there's emotional energy that's attached to it that has to be released in order for those tissues to feel safe and heal. So part of the trauma healing really comes from a space of, can I tell my story? Can I feel emotions and have thoughts in a safe space? And discharging what's stuck isn't just a physical discharge. It's an emotional, mental discharge of releasing what's tied up in it. But it's also that essence spirit of us participating alongside of this to make sure that who we are as a human being has permission to participate too. Because what I found is that so many people will take one approach. Typically, most people start with the approach of either their body first or their mind first. They take a functional wellness approach because they have disruptions in their body or something that relieves the pain that they're feeling in their body, or they go to a therapist for a mind-based approach. And neither of those are bad or wrong. The problem then lies with that re-traumatization can occur or full healing doesn't happen because they have got to connect all 3 parts in that place and looking at how each piece was wounded. And that's something that I work with individuals on.
I love that. I love that. So, Amanda, I'm going to throw you under the bus here. As
Another physical trauma. Oh,
as an intuitive healer, I think all of us, we all experienced some type of trauma. Jessica was talking about motor vehicle accident. I had a motor vehicle accident many, many years ago that not only broke my body, but, really gave me a lot of limiting beliefs. So like, I healed my body probably in the last 10 years, but then, it wasn't fully complete until I start getting over those limiting beliefs that you can heal, right? So, what are your thoughts about it on an intuitive side? When people are experiencing trauma, I love what Jessica was saying. There's the body, mind, and soul aspect. What are your thoughts on that?
this goes, I just have had these conversations recently. So I think that the physical trauma to our body is huge. And I think that we get caught up in Western medicine giving us a diagnosis, and the diagnosis isn't to us, the diagnosis is to our body. And being able to separate that out so that that diagnosis of that physical, you know, broken bones and those things do not become your identity. past does not become your identity. And I love that, trauma is an injury. It's not a syndrome or a, disability. It's an injury that can be healed. And so I think that having that mindset first off is that we can heal that part, but also looking at the emotional traumas that come with that. Knowing that when we define ourselves as that, we further embed that emotional trauma in our body, and then we become to identify it. So creating healthier idea of how to work through that, then I work more on the spiritual side of that, but it's also healing the whole body, but looking at that trauma and where that trauma got stuck. Specifically, what is that limiting belief that got stuck, and not having to relive that. I had a client once who she had been involved in a motor vehicle accident that she had no reason to have lived through.
Mhm.
And we were talking about the traumas, and she was overcoming the physical limitations. And I was talking from, a traditional standpoint, my own personal
Mhm.
experience of being in a motor vehicle accident, where I saw each time that I was going to be hit. I've been in a couple big ones, and each time I saw it, and the world goes into slow motion and
Slow
you can't
motion,
see
yeah.
anything. And her trauma was far more physically devastating than the trauma that I had experienced physically. But she kept saying, I don't have fears and emotions with this, because she didn't see it coming.
Mm.
So I think that's really interesting. And that, one is a practitioner, not to make assumptions about things that it's so easy to fall into, but looking at all of those pieces, the pieces that play into that, the physical, the mental, and the emotional aspects of that. And then we also have that whole society judgment. We have Western medicine's place in that, where if this pill didn't work, then we're going to give you this one and that one,
Mhm.
and this one to combat that one, and this one to offset. And instead of, my ever so humble opinion of Western medicine is that it just suppresses, our body is giving us pain signals to tell us we need to address this. Also,
Correct.
the theory that those traumas, even if it's not a physical trauma, gets trapped in the body and creates physical pain. And so looking at all of those aspects to tease all of those apart, and figure out how you can take the nuggets and the information of what you've learned from each experience, hold the knowledge, and get rid of the emotional part, to be finished with the emotional part, so that when you think back to those traumas, or if glimpse into the back, it's just a glimpse. We don't get caught up with it, and it's no longer emotional baggage that we carry that weighs us down.
I love that. I love that. So, a couple of things that you mentioned, you're talking about modern medication, and I believe in medicine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti medicine or anti science, but like you said, one of the things that you said was really resonated with me, and something that I really stress when I'm helping a lot of people is pain in your body sometimes is a good thing, because when you have pain, your body's giving you signals of something is wrong. And most people are so used to not having pain, they're asking for medication to shut off these pains. And sometimes when you do that, there could be more underlying conditions going on that you're not going to be able to heal properly, right? So I love that you mentioned that, because so many people now, or it's like they got a headache or something hurts, they're popping a Tylenol. They're not even questioning why there's pain. They just so accustomed to that there's a pill for that, right? And as a functional nutrition and longevity coach, I'm always trying to educate people. If you have pain, it's a good thing. It may suck, but it's a good thing. There are warning signs that your body is telling you something. The other thing that you said was very interesting is your client didn't see that coming, right? So in which case she may not understand the emotions, the problems that the traumas caused. And I want to dive into this a little bit more with Jessica. I think so many of us, we have experienced trauma, but we don't know we're in trauma because we didn't see that coming,
Mhm.
right? So, what are your thoughts on that, Jessica?
Well, in the Arizona Trauma Institute, one of the things that we talked about with this idea of like we don't see it coming, the difference is when we see something coming, we brace for impact, whether that's a physical brace for impact or an emotional brace for impact. And so we kind of describe it like hard spaghetti, like it's very rigid. And if you hit hard spaghetti, it's going to crumble in a million pieces, right? When you have something that is like a wet spaghetti noodle, it is very malleable. So even if you hit it with the same impact, it melds to what is being what has hit it, and it doesn't necessarily break itself. And that's what happens a lot of times with the nervous system. So you might see something coming emotionally or physically, and you've braced yourself for impact because you're preparing yourself for what you think it might feel like. You're telling your body that I'm not safe, which is a big factor in healing trauma. This idea that you have to have felt sense of safety in your body. And so in trauma recovery, we're constantly looking at how much of the time are you scanning your environment and what cues are you using to tell yourself that you're safe or you're not safe. And so you talked about like not seeing things coming. There's so much in the trauma world they talk about called little t trauma. And it's these small, subtle movements of things along the way that jeopardize us feeling safe. And this can also, things like bullying, um, emotional abuse can come along because, especially for young children, they have this desire to be safe, but they can't necessarily communicate that they need to be safe. They just know it doesn't feel good. And so over time, this can traumatize like how the individual feels in certain situations. I had a great conversation with Minna the other day about this. Is like sometimes people are traumatized by buying groceries or gas. And it's because of the storyline so much that we hear about money and or lack thereof, right? So it is a moment in time or a lot of little moments. So we have big T traumas, which are really looked at as more of like moments in time, big events. But little t traumas are small things that happen over a pattern of times that remove that sense of safety from our nervous system. And we start to develop those beliefs or stories about why we didn't deserve safety. And I think that's one of the things in overcoming this is that while we may have emotional disruptions, a lot of times we don't necessarily tie it back to trauma. And so there's a lot of people, especially in certain generations, I see like the Gen Xers and the boomers specifically, where they'll justify things by saying, well, I wasn't abused and I have a roof over my head, and I have food on my table. But they're having these shutdowns at different points in their life or in different relationships, and explaining to them that's because your nervous system told you you weren't safe in a pattern of events in a relationship or in a situation, and you need to heal. Allow yourself to sort of feel those emotions or move that energy out of your body because it's stuck there, and your body's starting to break down on you because you lost your sense of emotional safety. That's a big concept to push against, though, with some people.
I love that, and there are a couple of Gen Xers here, right? So you have to be careful what you say there, Jessica.
Listen, I'm at the teetering edge. I claim more Gen X than I do anything else because But anyways, I
But
know it's
it's crazy. It's sort of like what you said. There's a lot of unknown trauma, and the thing that I let a lot of people think about that they don't think about is like your mindset. Your mind. A lot of that trauma is stuck up here. Regardless if it's your mind, your soul, whatever you want to call it, it's stuck up here. And trauma, regardless, can lead to depression. It can lead to all these conditions that you don't even know, right? All of a sudden, you don't want to be around people, right? All of a sudden, you don't want to get up and exercise. You don't want to eat, right? A lot of that can be caused by trauma, and trauma can cause disease in the body depending on where you're holding the trauma, right? I've done some studies depending where you are. Broken heart syndrome is a real thing. You can literally die from a broken heart, right? Depending where your trauma is hit, you can have problems with your, with your detox, holding it into your liver, your kidneys, and stuff like that, which can cause some serious health problems that's not going to show up on the labs, right? Because it's on your head, and your body and your mind is so attached to each other, and yet so many people think it just all can be healed internally because they think it's physical, right? So Amanda, we talked about a little bit about this. What are some of your healing strategies? Let's share some healing strategies to what we use in our practices, in our modalities, for the different types of traumas that we see. Because I'm sure we all have clients that experience different trauma. I'm not going to have the mental and physical abuse and stuff like that for these, unless you tell me about it. But that's not usually my clientele. But yeah, let's dive a little bit deeper in there, because like a lot of people think that like trauma is just abusive, or it could be, but like Jessica said, it could be just your little drama freaking out how expensive that carton of eggs is now, right?
Yeah, I think that, and identifying that little T's and big T's are not the same to every person. What did
Yeah.
you bring to it that makes you, as a Gen Xer, write it all off because we didn't know we had a choice? Or, I mean, and just looking at what does a person bring to the table. And, my very first professional career in the world was as an EMT. So dealing with people who were truly in crisis, and most of my professional careers throughout my life have been crisis oriented. So I think one of the first things that I work with in clients, and I know Jessica's touched on that too, is that non-judgment and having that safe space that whatever you're going to want to talk to me about is okay. I've seen and heard a whole lot of things in my life, and it's not my place to judge it. You're not asking me to come and live your life, nor am I asking you to come and live my life. So
Mhm.
just being able to open up and say the things they want to say, and having that safe environment. And whether you're working with a coach, a therapist, or it's your best friend that you
Mhm.
can say those stupid things in front of
Right.
without the judgment. It's, hey, I had this thought the other day, or I was wondering about, or whatever. So for me, it's a matter of creating that safe space and then working at what does that client feel is important to work through, not what my agenda is, because I would have been working through the emotional trauma and the fear of this accident for that one given client. She's like, no, there's nothing emotional, I didn't see it coming. So putting my values, my stuff, putting it away, bringing my toolbox, not my opinions. And so
Mhm.
creating that safe environment, and then looking at what it is that is more emotionally triggering. And when we deal with the emotional triggers, oftentimes relieving that trauma through, I use theta healing, and so relieving that trauma, the memories that come with that, it reduces that limiting belief so that that no longer gets in their way. So doing different pieces of breath work, having technique, EFT, all kinds of things. So whatever it is that's going to best meet that individual in their time and space and how they process things, because we all process things very, very differently.
Mhm.
And, looking at, yeah, where you're at and not having judgment.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing, Amanda. Jessica, I love to tap into your expertise. Like for you, when you have clients that is experiencing trauma, what are your go-tos? We're all coaches here. I'm sure we all empathetically are listening, but we all have different modalities on how we help people depending what type of trauma they have.
Yeah, one of the first things that we work on is actually practicing breathing in their body.
Mhm.
Because what is so many people don't realize is that when we are in a perceived threat, our body has activated that trauma response inside of our nervous system. And so it's not always that it's real danger. And so bringing that awareness to us that um, what are we doing with our body first and foremost? Because if we're in truly a state of danger, we don't have time to take some breaths. And so simple breathing techniques like a short breath in and a long breath out, even practicing that a couple times over within the short time of a minute, the body will relax. And
Mhm.
once the body has permission to relax, it sends the signal back to the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that we're back online and we're safe and functioning. So I like to start there first. And then, Amanda kind of mentioned this, but identifying like I always ask the question, like, what are you thinking, feeling, and believing in these
Mhm.
moments? Are you even aware? And so many clients don't have a true awareness of what they're thinking is, what their emotions are that they're feeling, and what belief it's actually connected to. So the first part of the work is actually getting them to decompress their body first and foremost. And the faster, the better. I think most people think that whether you go to a therapist or any kind of practitioner, like, I've done this thing and I should be able to use it and works amazing every single time and releases all of my all of my symptoms and everything is great. And what I tell people is like using a strategy to cope or to navigate through healing. Sometimes you find that yourself using it towards the end of an event. Like, let's say you're having a panic attack or a trauma response, right? And you're almost at the end and you're like, oh yeah, breathe. Okay. Right. The next time you try to use it, and if, you might say at that point, oh, well, it didn't work. Forget this. I'm not going to use it again. Right. But if you try it again the next time, and you might occur mid reaction, you're like, oh, no, remember, breathe right now. Okay, short breath in, long breath out, right? As you go through time of continuing to practice it, you can get to the point where you notice what a trigger might be to your nervous system, and you immediately default to the strategy to help bring that safety back into your body. And so
Mhm.
continued practice and awareness is really important in a trauma recovery situation. Is, are you able to identify what the things are that is setting your nervous system off? And so a lot of times we focus on like, what are you seeing and what are you hearing? Because of those are typically the two main entry points for activating the nervous system. And then we look at, what were you thinking about during when your body did that reaction? What were you thinking about? What emotions came up? What are you believing about that? And kind of unpacking some of those things and really looking at, how do I rewire a new belief system in? What does that look like to
Mhm.
choose a new belief system and actually look for evidence of it? Because the reality is there's actually evidence for both the limiting belief and the expansive belief, right? There's
Mhm.
realities for both, but our brain only will look for evidence of the limiting belief typically, unless we train it to look for the places where it's already occurred in our life. And then our brain's like, oh, yeah, that's no big deal. We can do that. So getting all of those things on board. But if our body is not calm and relaxed, it will not save. It's kind of like when you hit the save button on a document, it won't save the progress we're making if we can't do it in a relaxed body setting. I think also one thing that we've kind of talked about is that it's helpful to identify what is the main emotional issue and where it's felt in the body. Like liver holds on to so much anger and the grief is in the lungs and things like that. So identifying kind of where they're feeling that, there's a lot of somatic body release techniques you can use to kind of work out the emotion in those things as well, that the client doesn't necessarily have to tell the story, but
Mhm.
allows permission for them to release the emotional stuff that's stuck in the organ or the part of the body.
I love that, Jessica. So that is amazing because a couple of things that you talked about, and like I said, all our clients are very different, and to be honest, that's why
Mhm.
me and Minna, created the Chronic Health Collective, where we got the specialists in each fields, because like if I have a client that's coming for me in this, they want weight loss, but as I'm talking with them, and it becomes a little deeper with some emotional baggage and trauma, because it's like, a lot of our limiting beliefs is from how we brought up. It's funny. It's like My mom will always tell people, "Oh, you're fat," when you're not fat. In the back in the boomer days, fat means you're healthy, right? But for us, fat means you're fat. Fat's not a good thing. Don't call me fat, right? But the more you hear about that growing up, now you got the limiting belief you're always going to be fat no matter what you do, right? So for me, it's like a lot of times is trying to figure out where they got these limiting beliefs and if we can change those beliefs, right? So that's sort of part of what I do when I'm working with people, because I can give you all the advice to help you, but if you still believe it's not going to help, we need to break through those limiting beliefs first.
And
But
I
the
will
second,
say to this
yeah,
point, it's sometimes even as simple as changing your wording, because that's not who you are, it's what you have. You
mhm,
are not fat. You have it on your body. It's
correct.
not your identity in who you are. You are a human being. You are kind and compassionate. Those are character traits of who you are. But the fat on your body can change. That is something that you have as opposed to who you are. And I think so sometimes just changing the focus in clients, they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. That is true. That's not who I am as an
Correct.
essence and a being. It gives a different permission for healing.
I love that. I love that. And then the second thing you touch a little bit is talking about in that stress state. And like in the very beginning, I was talking about how stress can cause inflammation in your body. And, when you're talking about the nervous system, you're either in the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, right? The sympathetic is the flight and, fight or flight response. When you see a saber-toothed tiger chasing you, or nowadays it could be just a crazy cat chasing you, right? And you're freaking out. But when your body's in that fight or flight response all the time, uh, you know, you, there are purposes for it. But when it's happening all the time, it can cause chronic inflammation in the body. And like you said earlier, depending on which organs you're holding it in, is it for grief or loss or anger, you can affect those areas of your body. So a lot of times, for me, when I'm talking to people, I say, look, we need to figure out how to get back into the parasympathetic, the rest and digest state. And I think a lot of people, they don't sleep well because they can't get into that state. Right. And for me, I don't go as deep as you all, like for me, it's like maybe some simple breathing. I recommend some meditation apps. That's what I use. I always recommend what I use. And of course, if they need further help, that's when they're going to come into you all. But, one of the things, Amanda mentioned, for me as a longevity coach, I'm always looking at holistic ways to support your body to heal itself. And Amanda mentioned, yeah, both of us, we believe in holistic healing. We believe in your body's innate ability to heal itself. So we're always looking at products that can help and support that. And she mentioned that both of us, we do support and use LifeWave products. I'm not sure if you have experienced it yet, Jessica, but if you haven't, we're going to have to get you to experience it.
Yeah,
But,
it's on my list.
it's on your list. Great. We need to talk. But, one of the products I really like to use is the Ion. And it's really funny because, like I mentioned earlier, for me, I got that monkey mind. It's like when I go to sleep, I'm always thinking about the day, what I did right, what I did wrong, what I could have done different. It's like some of those meditation apps help, but it's like my mind is just like reliving the day. And it's like, man, I need to shut this sucker down and get me into that parasympathetic stage. And it's so funny because, I do this all the time when I'm sleeping. All it is, the thing I like about the ion patch is it releases inflammation. So it lowers inflammation. So, it's already like a 1-2 punch, right? We already know that stress, trauma causes inflammation. But I also like calling it the chill patch because depending on when you're using it, if you're using it at nighttime on certain acupuncture points, it actually puts you into the parasympathetic state. And it's funny because like I am a personal trainer also. I have clients I train in the morning. And usually I put this on to sleep, I'll like be popping it on my third eye. And I go to sleep and I'll sleep like a baby. But sometimes in the morning I forget to take it off. So here I'm working out, I'm on Zoom, and like my clients are just sort of staring at me. They don't say nothing, right? And then near the end, it's like, what's that on your forehead? Have you changed your religion? And I said, no, 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 it has nothing to do about changing my religion, because it's got me so chilled out, I forget to take it off. But this is like such an amazing technology that just really just using phototherapy, right? Your own body's light and energy to transform different chemicals in your body to heal yourself. And this is really my goal to lower inflammation. So like you said, if I feel tightness in my heart or my kidneys, sometimes I put it there. My knees are tired from too much hiking, I put it there. But I usually use it mainly for sleep. It just really chills me out. And one of my clients says it got rid of all her forehead wrinkles too, which is a plus. Right. But again, that is sort of my go-to, for clients that want almost like a more faster holistic approach rather than taking a Tylenol, because this is really naturally putting you into that parasympathetic state. Right. So any final thoughts, Amanda, final thoughts for anyone out there that is feeling trauma, or they may not even know that they're in trauma. What are your thoughts? Like, what can they do to dive a little deeper into that, and how they can reach out to you if they are experiencing trauma that they can't release?
So I think that just when every day is a drudgery, when you're not waking up and excited about what you can do that day and the opportunities that day has, when you're constantly looking behind you and those things, I think I really hate the word trauma because I think sometimes it's overused in today's topic. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But we all have things, and when it's consuming far too much of our life, that we spend all this time worrying and thinking about that's time that you do need to be reaching out to someone. Definitely, Western medicine is there for those who need that. And the coaching services that I offer do not take the place necessarily of
course.
a traditional therapist or a medical doctor.
Yes.
But I'm happy to help you to look at that and decide, maybe Jessica's going to be a better fit for you than I am. But the first thing is when you're stuck in a rut, you feel like you're going through the same thing every day, you don't have that spark and joy and happiness in your life, you need to be reaching out to someone and to find them. If you'd like to reach out to me, the best way would be through amandabethhealing.com. I'm on Facebook and all the socials, so that's where you can find me.
I love it. I love it. And it is so true, for all those that is, facing trauma, regardless if it's emotional, physical, right? You don't need to face it alone, because that's where people fall into that funk.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Yeah, definitely not alone, because this likely did not happen alone either.
Yes.
And you didn't wake up. It didn't happen in one day. You didn't come to where you are in one day. It's going to take more than a day. So find someone that you can really work with and work through this so that you can move forward, and I appreciate, not moving past it. We're moving forward. We're building new blocks. We're building new adventures, and, really looking forward to each day.
I love that. Jessica, what are your final thoughts?
No, this was such a good conversation. I always love talking with individuals in this perspective. I think for me, if you find yourself having difficulty, sometimes even making simple decisions, because they're tied to so much of your past, like the identity of who you were when you went through the trauma, or, before the trauma occurred, and you have that difficulty. I work with a lot of clients who don't the conversation is, do you buy brand name or generic at the grocery store? And they're like, well, I'm allowed to do that. So I think when you find yourself stuck in repeating patterns of behaviors that are tied to past relationships or past traumatic situations that continue to stay activated in you, that are holding you back, is one place where we can definitely look at, how do we rewire this individual of who you are and what it looks like to move forward, and really I spend a lot of time looking at what I call the treasure of you. What's the unique identity of who you are, and how can we move, like anchor that in and move that forward with permission and in safety? Not connected to just a series of traumas or past relationships that were really painful and difficult, but really giving yourself permission to live a vibrant life.
I love that. And what's the best way for people to get hold of you right
Yeah,
now?
so right now, the best way to get a hold of me is actually if you send me an email or on my socials. We're updating some of my stuff on my website. So the best way is to start with email, and then we'll go from there.
I love that. I love that. And like I said in the very beginning, we're all part of the Chronic Health Collective. And one of the things that I love with my Chronic Health Collective team is we're all specialists in different aspects of life. And, if you go onto our website, chronichealthcollective.com, sign up for our magazine. Every month we rewrite articles on, our specialties and how we see through our lens monthly on the topics that we share. And I think, there's going to be there's 13 of us. There's going to be one of us. That's actually 14 of us now. There's actually going to be one of us. I'm sure that's going to resonate with you during the time when you read the magazine, right? It's something that we write new every month. It's something that we're pouring our heart and soul out there to help others, right? And it's a free magazine, chronichealthcollective.com. And of course, we have a show, Chronic Health Collective, also that is live every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. And you can watch replays at youtube.com/ at Chronic Health Collective. And it's funny because Jessica was talking about her, conversation with Minna. Her episode is actually coming up next Tuesday. So, definitely check up with her. This is literally a trauma week because we have another guest on our Chronically Healthy Life tomorrow, and she's going to be talking about, domestic abuse, how she suffered and how to get around that too. But this is something that no one ever wants to talk about. No one ever thinks they have. And, I really wanted to get it out there. Sort of like Amanda says, trauma is not something that any of us want, right? But the main thing is we need to be aware we all have some trauma in our life. And until we release that trauma, we may never be fully well, right? You don't want that holding that anger in your lungs, anger in your liver, right? And grief in your lungs, right? So if you're having breathing problems, maybe you're having grief. And I totally understand that on Jessica's point because she helped me out when my latest fur baby Patches passed away. And it's like, seriously, I felt like my asthma was coming back. Now I understand why, because it's my grief, right? It's affecting my
Yes.
lungs. So definitely reach out to all of us. And, thank you so much for jumping in for, my new show, Fountain of Youth. And we love to get you guys back because, my purpose of the show is try to get more engagement live on Facebook, try to get some engagement as people know that we're going to be on the same time every week, that they can maybe start coming in with questions. So when you're watching the replays, send some questions in to me, send some questions in for Jessica and Amanda, and we'd love to help you any which way we can.
Yes.
And if you're ever at a point where you're guessing, like, is this trauma? Is this not trauma? Is it really a big deal? If it's a big deal to you, it is a big deal. It is worth talking about. Stop minimizing it. Stop making excuses and tucking it away. Get it out. Move on. Move forward. And go with your life. Don't be held back. None of us deserve that.
That's right.
So
I love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
don't be held back. Just if you're thinking about it, then it's an issue. If it's an issue to you, it's an issue. Don't ever doubt that.
Exactly. Last thoughts, Jessica. Last thoughts
No,
before
I
we
just
head off.
you're worth doing the work. You're worth doing the work to release it and to heal. You're here for a purpose on this earth at this very time that you're here. And there's no matter what your story is, you are worth doing the work to heal and live a healthy, vibrant, beautiful life.
I love that. We all are here for a purpose. And like I said, seek the help when you need it. And even if you're not sure, seek the help. Talk to your best friend. You
Yeah.
never know where that's going to lead. Thank you so much for being our guest, and I will see you guys soon. Goodbye.
Bye.